All right, welcome back, everyone. Gabe and I are here to talk about the psychological considerations around premature ejaculation. And we're going to start with some love maps.
We talked a little bit about this in our last episode, just kind of hinted at it, but love maps are a little bit of how each individual person feels stimulation, like psychologically. And so since the brain and the body are so connected, right, that also means what I enjoy physically through that psychological lens, right? So for some folks, it might be, right, this is where you hear of things like fetishisms, so someone might have a love map that includes some sort of foot play that they enjoy, or it might just be somebody really enjoys engaging in a sexual experience just at home, like something that makes them feel safe or something that makes them feel comfortable. And so it varies widely for people. But with premature ejaculation and making sense of love maps, there are some ways in which doing too many of the things in your love map can make the excitation happen much more quickly and make that psychological trigger of like, we're going to orgasm, this is happening now, this is too much, can happen more quickly. But it can also be when you're out of your love maps. So the sympathetic one, right, is freaking out about the circumstances. And in that situation, like nothing is what I want, but maybe I also want to impress this partner. Right. And, they like being outside in the dark, and I'm, that makes me really uncomfortable. And so we get started and I just have that premature ejaculate experience because of the other pieces that we've talked about maybe in previous episodes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And what about, let's talk more about triggers and perhaps how maybe the sexual scripts kind of plays into that as well.
Yeah. So, I think with triggers, again, when we're talking about the neural pathways psychologically, our brain builds patterns based on our experiences. And so really like we can create neural pathways based on repeat experiences. And that can happen from trauma. So we have neural pathways that are trauma associated. We can build some of those by maybe doing, relaxation and things like that. So you can start to trigger relaxation much more quickly. In the same way, when you start to have premature ejaculation related experiences, you can build a neurological pattern that starts to trigger you in certain circumstances. Or even if your mind just peaks for a moment and says like, ooh, what if I have this PE issue again? Then it might trigger in your psychology of like, oh, well, now that you've mentioned it, we're going to use that neural pathway. And so that can trigger some of those moments where you have the ejaculate, much earlier than you've intended. The sexual scripts aspect is actually a really broad research area. So as I was looking into some of the sexual script things, I mean, we talk about everything from love maps, those are their own sexual scripts, all the way down to, the performance script. So what am I supposed to do when I engage in something sexual? What are the rules, But when I think about sexual scripts in relationship to premature ejaculation, I think about these 4 scripts that include satisfaction, conventionality, rigidity, and complexity. And so when we're thinking about what my experience is with my partner and what happens when I have a premature ejaculate experience, then we can examine like what's the complexity of the scenario. So meaning how complex or simplistic are our approaches to each other sexually. And that can play a role in what's triggering for us psychologically if we need more or less complexity. If it's too complex, again, we might get really anxious about our ability to perform and what we're able to do, and then we might trigger a trigger for premature ejaculation. If we're following conventionality, there are different layers of that. Like what's socially conventional, which we mentioned in our first episode, like I'm supposed to last a long time. And so if I think I'm supposed to last a long time and I feel like I'm already reaching my point of no return, then I might trigger again something that makes me go through that process and finish even sooner. Rigidity being how rigid we are in and the order of what we do or of what's allowed. And sometimes if you and your partner can negotiate how you might change your patterns, that can make PE not really a big deal. So if maybe I keep a few layers of clothes on and I do things for my partner first. And so when they're satisfied and I'm moving in to have my turn, it doesn't matter how quickly that might go or might happen. And like you said, we can lean into that pleasure, even if it's sooner than what we wanted. And in so doing, we can build a neural pathway that associates sex with positive experiences, right? And so then it can start to reduce those other negative triggers that associate sex with negative experiences or fear or anxiety.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There, I want like what you're saying is 100% like when we any sensory information from our body coming from our body has to be processed through the limbic system, that emotional regulating part of our body. And when you're talking about the pathways, neural pathways, I mean, folks, this isn't just like, oh, psychology, it's here and it's like in its own bubble, but it has no physiological impact on me whatsoever. Like, I want people to know that emotions and physical sensations in our body are not different or not dualistic in any way. They are one and the same and processed in the same way. And so any type of, whether that's pain or pleasure or premature ejaculation, that sensation is processed through the limbic system and other parts of your brain. But that's what I'm hearing, Gabe, is that we can rewire different associations, different learning patterns, different
Right.
emotions related to certain sensations if we are willing to embrace a different sexual script or let
Right.
go of perhaps some of the traditionally held values around sex.
Yeah. And it's interesting because there is some research that was done and I don't have a reference for it. I read it and I just don't have it off the top of my head, but it's like questionnaire based on women's experience with what produces pleasure in different types of stimulation. And the penis is not the top rated way to stimulate a female
I've read that too. Yeah.
genitals or clitoris or anything like that. And so there's this big emphasis on the role that the penis has to play in engaging in a sexual, experience with the partner. And it's just not, it doesn't have to be that rigid is what I should say. It can still be fun and mutual. And it might be that for some folks that they get to do that. And that's great. What I've learned from being a therapist who does all of this work in sexual health is very few people have the idealistic sexual relationship that we think everyone else has.
Right.
It's much more that people are having to negotiate and work through all kinds of differences between them in their relationship and what their desires are and what their bodies are capable of. That they just don't all do the same things that everyone thinks is what you're supposed to do. So sticking to that rigidity is oftentimes what's perpetuating some of the premature ejaculation problems.
Absolutely. And really robbing you from your sexual freedom and that sexual voice and that coupleship and experience of pleasure in that moment. I think, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I have read this somewhere in literature or learned it from the sexual health certificate program I was in, that the average intercourse time is like penis vagina intercourse time is 7 minutes ish, somewhere around
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, and that's we're talking average then when we're exploring like the age ranges of where you're including folks who have been together for 30 years.
Right.
Oftentimes we'll even quote that number even shorter for folks that are experiencing sex with a partner, for the first time or in their early life experiences. When I'm teaching in colleges, I like to tell them 90 seconds,
Yeah.
just to get a good,
Fair. Yeah.
idea of that
Yep.
there are going to be times where you're going to be really excited because this is all new. And there's been a lot of, in Western American society, there's a lot of buildup around nudity and around sex that is a part of this psychological considerations. And so we're told to last 20 minutes, The average, including, older adults, is maybe somewhere around 7 minutes. And then I am 18 and my peak of what my like sexual prowess and hormones are doing. And psychologically, I'm in my peak of all the newness and excitement of what's going on. Yeah, there's a good chance it's not going to last super long in some of those early engagements.
Right, right. And that is okay, totally okay, healthy and normal. So, what a great conversation. Thank you so much. And in our next video, folks, we are going to be experimenting. So Gabe and I are going to go through some experiments that you can try at home. So we'll see you then.
If it says blow anus, with air, and you're like, oh, I don't know if that's for me. And your partner's like, okay, well, could you try it for me? Like there's some communication that can come out of that.